"Drink up, sweetheart," my wife purred. Then her knees buckled, not mine. I'd swapped our martinis the instant her smirk warned me. Minutes later, a lab text screamed one word, Zolpidem. While she slept off her own poison, two strangers slammed divorce papers into my chest, painted me a junkie, and froze every dollar I owned. I thought that was rock bottom, until I learned my lifelong best friend staged the whole thing to steal my company. I wasn't broken. I was awake, armed with proof and 30 days to flip their trap inside out. My name is John Robert Murphy, and I'm 40 years old. I spend my days running Fathom Tech, the marine electronics company I built from a garage workshop into our glass and timber headquarters overlooking Lake Minnetonka. My wife Carla, once my most enthusiastic supporter, now moves through our evenings with practiced smiles and vague explanations for her late returns home. My business partner Brad Kessler, my oldest friend since Boy Scouts, has been pressing me about selling to North Star Defense with unusual intensity. The cedar and varnish scent of my workshop used to calm me, but lately, it's where I retreat when the silence grows too heavy. The Navy taught me to track subtle shifts in environments, a skill that saved my life twice on destroyers, and something in my gut says the coordinates are changing. But let me start from the beginning. I'd been building boats since I was 12. Small ones at first, then larger craft as my skills improved. There's something about working with your hands that centers you, gives you clarity. The Navy just refined what was already there. Taught me to trust that feeling in my gut when something's off. Like the time our sonar tech swore there was nothing on the screen, but I felt the displacement in the water. Turned out to be a Russian sub running silent. The captain called it a sixth sense. I call it paying attention. That Thursday evening, every one of those senses was screaming. Carla moved around our kitchen with practiced efficiency, the one she designed down to the last drawer pull. The granite countertops gleamed under recessed lighting, catching the silver flash of the martini shaker as she worked. I watched her from my seat at the island, pretending to scroll through emails on my phone. "Board meeting went well," she asked, not turning around. Her voice had that hollow cheerfulness she'd perfected lately. "Well enough," I said. "Brad's still pushing the North Star deal." The steel shaker rattled with more force than necessary. The sound echoed off the hard surfaces like warning bells. "And you're still being stubborn about it?" She kept her back to me, reaching for the gin. "I built Fathom from nothing, Carla. I'm not handing it over to become another division in some defense conglomerate's portfolio." She made a small humming sound, neither agreement nor disagreement, just acknowledgement that words had been spoken. You ever stand on the deck of a ship in perfectly calm waters and feel the barometer dropping? That's what it was like watching my wife of 15 years prepare our drinks. Everything looked normal, her chestnut bob swinging just above her shoulders, her designer yoga pants and cashmere sweater, the familiar movements of her hands. But something was fundamentally wrong. "Almost ready," she said, pouring the martinis with a flourish. "You look tense. This should help." I smiled thinly. Been a long day. When she turned to grab the olives from the refrigerator, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She'd made the drinks differently. Normally, Carla added a splash of dry vermouth to both our glasses. Tonight, I watched her add it to only one. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. She returned, placing two identical martini glasses on the granite countertop with a soft click, one in front of me, one at her usual spot. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of her lips, not her genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, but something tighter, more calculated. It was the kind of expression I'd seen on opponents across negotiating tables just before they thought they were about to close a trap. "Here we are," she said, sliding onto the stool across from me. "Just what the doctor ordered." My Navy training kicked in automatically. When facing an unknown threat, gather information before acting. I lifted my glass in a toast, making small talk about some supplier issues while cataloging every detail of her behavior, the slight flush on her neck, the way her eyes kept darting to my glass, the barely contained energy in her movements. "To new beginnings," Carla said, raising her glass and watching me intently. "New beginnings," I echoed. She took a sip while I pretended to, the glass barely touching my lips. Nothing in my expression changed as my mind raced through possibilities. none of them good. When she looked away to check her phone, I made my move, smooth and deliberate, like passing a secret document. A reverse sleight of hand I'd learned from a quartermaster with a magic hobby. I switched our glasses without a sound, without a ripple in either martini. "So Brad thinks we could close by the end of the quarter," I continued, as if nothing had happened. "Says the North Star offer won't stay on the table forever." "He's right, you know." Carla took another drink, deeper this time. "Sometimes you have to know when to cash out." She swirled what remained in her glass, my glass now. "This has an extra kick tonight. Did you use a different gin?" "Same as always," I replied, watching her over the rim of my untouched drink. She smiled. "A lazy, spreading thing." "Well, it's good, really good." I nodded, set my glass down, and slid it slightly away from me. "How was your day? You mentioned lunch with Caroline." "Oh, that..." She waved dismissively, then frowned slightly. "Is it warm in here to you?" "Seems normal to me." Carla took another substantial sip, nearly finishing the drink. We should really talk about the North Star offer. It's a good deal. J.R." Her words were beginning to slur at the edges. She blinked slowly, then more rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the hammering in my chest. "I'm fine. Just..." She stood suddenly, then gripped the counter. "Maybe I need some water." The martini glass tilted in her hand. Clear liquid splashed onto the granite as the stem slipped through her fingers. I lunged forward, catching it before it shattered. But Carla didn't seem to notice. She was staring at me with unfocused eyes, confusion spreading across her features. "J.R.?" she mumbled. "I don't feel..." Her knees buckled. My pulse thundered in my ears as I rounded the island to catch her before she hit the floor. I eased Carla onto one of the kitchen stools, my arm firmly around her waist. Her head lolled against my shoulder. Then she suddenly straightened, blinking rapidly. "Whoa," she said with a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "That was weird. What happened?" I kept my voice neutral, concerned husband on full display while my mind cataloged every detail. "Just got dizzy for a second." She pressed her fingers against her temple. "Must be that vertigo thing coming back. Remember when I had it last summer?" I remembered. 3 days of legitimate dizziness after a sinus infection. Nothing like this. "Maybe you should lie down," I suggested, watching her pupils dilate unevenly in the kitchen's recessed lighting. "I think you're right." She stood cautiously, waving off my attempt to help. "I'm fine, really. Just need some sleep." I nodded, playing along. "I'll clean up and be up soon." As soon as I heard the bedroom door close upstairs, I moved quickly. The untouched martini sat on the counter, evidence. I needed to preserve it properly. In the garage workshop where I kept emergency supplies for my test boats, I found what I needed. A sterile sample vial from the marine-grade first aid kit. The garage smelled of ethanol and steel, familiar and grounding as I carefully transferred the liquid. My hands were steady, the same steadiness that had served me well during equipment failures at sea. I sealed the vial, labeled it with the date and time, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Back in the kitchen, I washed both glasses thoroughly, leaving no trace. Then I climbed the stairs and peeked into our bedroom. Carla was already asleep, or pretending to be, her breathing deep and even. Too even. I went through the motions of my nightly routine, then lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. After an hour of calculated patience, I eased out of bed. "Going to finish some work," I whispered when she stirred. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. The digital clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when I backed out of the driveway. A dense fog had settled over the lake, swallowing the beams of my headlights. The sample vial felt heavy in my pocket as I navigated the winding shoreline road. Ever wonder how quickly your life can turn? 1 minute you're living what you thought was the dream. Successful company, lakefront home you built with your own hands, wife of 15 years by your side. The next, you're driving through midnight fog to have a drink tested because you suspect your wife just tried to drug you. The rain started as I hit the highway toward Minneapolis. a soft patter that quickly intensified into a steady drum against the windshield. Street lamps created hazy halos in the mist, stretching and contracting as I passed beneath them. The rhythmic swish of the wipers matched my heartbeat, steady, determined. I'd called ahead to StoryLab, an independent testing facility that advertised 24-hour services. A former Navy buddy had used them during a messy divorce case. Discretion guaranteed, their website promised. Tonight, I'd find out if that was true. The lab occupied the ground floor of a nondescript office building in an industrial park. The reception area was empty except for a young man with tired eyes and a lab coat. "I called earlier," I said, producing the vial. "Need a comprehensive tox screen, rush basis." He nodded, sliding a form across the counter. "We'll need a name for the sample." I hesitated. Using either of our real names seemed risky. "Lake House 001, I finally said. The tech raised an eyebrow but didn't comment as he wrote it down. "Alcohol content analysis too?" he asked, examining the clear liquid. "Everything. I need to know exactly what's in there." I filled out the rest of the form with minimal personal information. "How soon can I get results?" "Rush processing takes 8 hours. He glanced at the wall clock showing 1:17 a.m. "Should be ready by lunch tomorrow. We'll email the secure link." I paid in cash, an extra fee for the rush service and discretion, and watched as he labeled the sample and logged it into their system. "We'll call the number you provided when it's ready," he said, handing me a receipt. The rain had intensified when I stepped back outside, sheeting across the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, not yet starting the engine. The reality of what I was doing hit me like a physical blow. 15 years of marriage, and here I was, having my wife's drink tested for drugs. The drive home was a blur of rain-slicked roads and swirling thoughts. What would the test show? What would I do with the information? And most importantly, why? What was Carla's endgame? I slipped back into the house at 2:45 a.m. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Carla hadn't moved, her breathing still unnaturally even. I settled into the armchair by the window instead of returning to bed, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass, the lake invisible beyond. At exactly 3:00 a.m., my phone pinged with a text message. "Sample received and processing. Results available by 12 p.m. Reference: Lake House 0011. I stared at the message, the blue light illuminating my face in the dark room. 8 more hours until I'd know for certain what had been in that glass. 8 hours of pretending everything was normal. "Daylight suddenly feels dangerous," I whispered to the empty room, watching the first hint of gray lighten the eastern sky. The next day, I busied myself at Fathom Tech's design bay, trying to focus on the new sonar display prototype we were developing. The familiar smell of hot solder and circuit boards usually calmed me, a scent that took me back to those long nights in my garage when the company was just a dream. But today, not even the rhythm of work could steady my hands. "You okay, boss?" Tanner, one of my engineers, glanced up from his workstation. "You've resoldered that same connection 3 times. "Just being thorough," I lied, setting down the iron. "Sometimes you've got to triple-check the things that matter." It was nearly noon. Every few minutes, I refreshed my email, the anticipation like a weight pressing against my chest. The lab had promised results by lunch, and each passing minute stretched like taffy. Have you ever had that feeling where you both desperately want to know something and are terrified of finding out? That was me, sitting in that workshop, pretending to work while my life hung in digital limbo. I excused myself to my office, a glass-walled space overlooking the production floor. The privacy glass was a feature I rarely used, but today I tapped the switch, watching the clear walls frost over. Alone, I pulled up my email again. The notification chimed at 12:07 p.m. Subject: StoryLab results. Reference: Lake House 001. My finger hovered over the message. Once I opened this, there was no going back. Whatever was inside would change everything, or confirm what I already suspected deep down. I clicked. The PDF loaded, clinical and sterile. My eyes scanned past the technical jargon until they landed on the results section, bold and unmistakable. Zolpidem, 35 milligrams detected. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Zolpidem, Ambien, a sleep medication. At 35 milligrams, more than 3 times the standard prescription dose. Enough to knock someone out cold, possibly dangerous. My stomach knotted into a tight ball. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't Carla accidentally mixing up medications or some bizarre misunderstanding. This was deliberate. My wife had tried to drug me. The shock hit me in waves, each one stronger than the last. My Navy training kicked in, the way it always did in crisis. On a destroyer, when alarms sound, you don't panic. You run through protocols. Assess, contain, respond. I remembered emergency drills aboard the USS Fitzgerald, the klaxons, the practiced movements, the calm amid chaos. The instructor's voice echoed in my head. When things go sideways, stick to procedure. Emotion gets sailors killed. I printed the report, each page sliding out of the printer with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet office. 7 pages total, 7 bullets of evidence. Tanner knocked on the door, startling me. "Meeting with the chip supplier at 2A, he said through the frosted glass. "Still on?" "Cancel it," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Something's come up. Family emergency." I gathered the pages, folded them precisely, and slipped them into an envelope. Then I sat at my desk, hands flat on the surface, and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Navy breathing. Crisis breathing. What was Carla's endgame? Was this a one-time impulse, or part of something larger? The questions tumbled through my mind like debris in a storm. I needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. I locked my office, nodded to the receptionist on my way out, and headed for my truck. The drive to the lake house would take 40 minutes. 40 minutes to rehearse what I'd say, how I'd approach this. I couldn't go in hot. Couldn't let emotion drive this confrontation. Start with questions, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel. Let her talk. Listen for inconsistencies. Dark clouds had gathered over the lake by the time I pulled into our driveway. The house, the one I'd spent 3 years building, every beam and joist placed by my hands, looked suddenly foreign. I sat in the truck for a long moment, the envelope heavy in my jacket pocket. A flash of lightning illuminated the water, followed seconds later by a low rumble of thunder. The storm was still a few miles out, but closing in fast. I stepped onto the gravel path, each footstep crunching like broken glass in my ears. Up the 3 cedar steps I'd cut and planed myself. Across the porch, where we'd spent countless summer evenings watching the sunset. My hand reached for the door handle just as another flash lit up the sky. Thunder rolled across the lake, closer now, the sound vibrating through the wooden boards beneath my feet. I stepped into our home, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click. The living room was dim, lit only by a cluster of vanilla-scented candles on the mantel. Their flickering light cast long shadows across the hardwood floors I'd sanded by hand. "Carla," I called out. She appeared from the kitchen, wineglass in hand. Not a martini this time. Smart. "You're home early," she said, her voice casual. Too casual. She wore yoga pants and one of those expensive sweatshirts that doesn't look like a sweatshirt. Her hair was perfect, makeup fresh. For someone who'd been drugged last night, she looked remarkably put together. "We need to talk." I kept my voice level, just like I'd practiced in the truck. "About." Her eyebrow arched slightly. I walked to the coffee table, walnut, with a live edge I'd preserved from a tree that fell on our property during our first year here. I pulled the envelope from my jacket and laid the lab report flat on the surface. About why there was enough Zolpidem in my martini to knock out a linebacker. Carla's expression didn't change, not even a flicker. She took a slow sip of wine, set the glass down, and picked up the report. Her eyes scanned the pages with practiced indifference. Then she laughed, not nervously, confidently. "Are you serious right now?" She flipped through the pages. "You took our drinks to a lab. This is what you do with your time." 35 milligrams, Carla. That's not accidental." She laughed again, harder this time. "God, J.R. Listen to yourself. You've been working too hard. This paranoid streak of yours, it's getting worse." Paranoid. My voice rose despite my best efforts. You drugged my drink. I made us martinis, which, by the way, you didn't even drink. She tossed the report back onto the coffee table. So what exactly is your theory here? That I tried to drug you but somehow drugged myself instead. That makes perfect sense. I hadn't expected this angle. I'd prepared for denial, tears, maybe even confession, but not this complete inversion of reality. We both know what happened, I said, my jaw tight. You made the drinks. You handed me mine. I switched them when you turned away. Her face hardened. You switched our drinks, and you think I'm the one with problems? She shook her head. You need help, J.R. Professional help. Stop it, I said. Just stop. I saw your face when you took that first sip. You knew something was wrong. Carla stood up suddenly, snatched the lab report from the table, and ripped it in half. Then quarters, then eighths. The pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti. There. Problem solved. Her voice was ice. You can get your paranoid delusions analyzed somewhere else. She stormed upstairs, each footstep a deliberate stomp. A door slammed. Then silence. I stood there, staring at the shredded paper on our living room floor. The pieces didn't matter. I had the digital copy, and the lab had the records. But something about seeing that evidence destroyed so casually made my chest tighten. I slept on the couch that night, if you could call it sleep, more like a series of restless dozes interrupted by racing thoughts. The candles burned down to nothing, leaving only their sweet scent hanging in the air. Dawn came with the soft blue light of a Minnesota morning. I was making coffee when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet house. I opened the door to find 2 men in business casual attire. One held a clipboard. John Robert Murphy, the clipboard man asked. Yes. You've been served. He handed me a thick envelope. These are divorce proceedings filed by Carla Davenport Murphy. The second man stepped forward. I'm also here to inform you that by temporary court order, you're required to vacate these premises immediately. The locks will be changed within the hour. I stood there, the envelope heavy in my hands. On what grounds? It's all in the paperwork, sir, Clipboard said, already turning to leave. But if you want the short version, chronic substance abuse and emotional cruelty. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand. Substance abuse? That's completely false. Take it up with the court, sir. We're just the messengers. They walked back to their car as I stood frozen in the doorway. Behind me, I heard movement on the stairs. Carla descended, already dressed for the day in a tailored blazer and slacks. She carried an overnight bag, mine. I took the liberty of packing some essentials, she said, setting the bag at my feet. The locksmith will be here in 20 minutes. You planned this, I said, realization dawning. The drug drink wasn't a mistake. It was insurance, in case I caught on. She smiled thinly. You always were clever, J.R., just not clever enough. The locksmith arrived right on schedule. A heavy-set man with a tool belt who avoided eye contact as he worked. I stood on the porch, duffel bag in hand, divorce papers tucked under my arm, watching as he removed the locks I'd installed myself. All set, ma'am, he said to Carla, handing her a set of new keys. Deadbolts secure. She tested it once, the bolt sliding home with a final, metallic scrape that seemed to echo across the lake. The rain started as I pulled away from the house, my house, the one I'd designed and built with my own 2 hands. Just a light drizzle at first, but enough to blur the edges of everything. Seemed fitting. I drove on autopilot, mind racing through possibilities. Without access to the house, I'd need money for a hotel. My wallet had about $80 cash, but I had plenty in the bank, enough to rent a decent place while I sorted this mess out. The Lakeside First National parking lot was half empty when I pulled in. Inside, the bank still had that same fake leather and lemon polish smell it had had since I opened my first account there 20 years ago. I took a number and waited, flipping through the divorce papers. The more I read, the tighter my chest got. Number 43. I approached the counter where Diane, a teller I'd known for years, smiled at me. Her smile faltered when she saw my face. J.R., you look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay? Just need to make a withdrawal, I said, sliding my ID and bank card across the counter. $5,000 should do it. She nodded and typed something into her computer, then frowned, typed some more. The frown deepened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy, but it appears there's a hold on your accounts." "Which account?" "All of them. Personal checking, savings, and all Fathom Tech corporate accounts." She lowered her voice. "It says accounts frozen pending litigation. Did you know about this?" My stomach dropped. "No." "When did this happen?" She checked the screen again. The order was processed first thing this morning. Carla had been busy. Very busy. "There must be some mistake," I said, though I knew there wasn't. "Can I speak with the manager?" 20 minutes later, I walked back to my truck with empty pockets and a cold knot of reality settling in my gut. The manager had been apologetic but firm. Court orders were court orders. Nothing he could do. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain. I sat behind the wheel, listening to it drum on the roof while I flipped through the court documents again. There it was, buried in legal jargon. All assets frozen until the evidentiary hearing. 30 days from now. 30 days to prove I wasn't an unstable, substance-abusing husband. 30 days to counter whatever evidence Carla had manufactured. 30 days, or I'd lose everything. The company I'd built from nothing. The house I'd designed board by board. I pulled out the hearing notice and placed it on my dashboard. May 17th. The date stared back at me, unblinking and merciless. You ever feel like your whole life's been hijacked? Like someone hit the emergency brake while you were cruising at 70? That's where I was sitting, in the sudden silence after the screech of tires, waiting for the impact. With no money and no place to stay, I drove to Lake Minnetonka. There's a rest area on the North Shore where truckers sometimes park overnight. Not exactly 5-star accommodations, but it had a bathroom and no one would bother me. I parked facing the water. Rain rippled across the surface, making the lake look like it was boiling. I reclined my seat as far as it would go and tried to sleep. But my mind wouldn't shut down. I kept replaying every moment of the past few weeks, looking for clues I'd missed. Carla's late nights. Her sudden interest in company financials. The phone calls that ended when I walked into the room. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving everything with that clean, washed smell. The lake was dead calm now, reflecting a sky full of stars. I pulled out my phone, 10% battery left. I scrolled through my contacts, past names I couldn't call, not my employees. I couldn't drag them into this mess. Not my few friends. Most were connected to the company or to Carla. Then I saw it. Hank Rivers. Hank had been a JAG officer when I was in the Navy. 20 years my senior. He'd taken me under his wing, taught me about patent law when I was developing my first sonar system. After retirement, he'd moved to Minneapolis to be near his daughter. We'd grab lunch maybe once a year, exchange Christmas cards, not close, but solid. The kind of man who answered his phone at 3 in the morning. I didn't know, but I was running out of options. My thumb hovered over his name. The dashboard clock ticked over to 3:17 a.m. In a few hours, the world would wake up, and I'd have to face it with no home, no money, and a company hanging in the balance. I tapped call and held my breath, unsure if the older man would answer. The phone rang once, twice. I was about to hang up when a deep voice answered. "Rivers here." I hesitated, suddenly aware of how crazy this would sound at 3 in the morning. "Hank, it's J.R. Murphy. I'm sorry to call so late." "J.R.?" His voice was gravelly but instantly alert. "What's wrong, son?" Something about him calling me son nearly broke me. I swallowed hard. "I'm in trouble, Hank. Bad trouble. I need advice from someone who knows the law and someone I can trust." There was a brief pause. "Where are you?" "Lake Minnetonka rest area. My wife locked me out of my house yesterday. Froze all my accounts. I've been sleeping in my truck." "Jesus," I heard rustling on his end. "Stay put. I'll text you my address. You remember that diner on Hennepin, Maggie's? Meet me there at 7. "Hank, I can't. That wasn't a request, Murphy. 7 o'clock, and bring whatever paperwork you've got." The line went dead. I stared at the phone until his text came through with an address in Eden Prairie. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something other than panic. I dozed fitfully for a few hours as the sky lightened from black to gray. By 6:30, I'd washed my face in the rest area bathroom and was pulling into Maggie's parking lot. The place was already half full with the early shift crowd, construction workers and office folks grabbing breakfast before the day started. Hank was waiting in a corner booth, 2 steaming mugs of coffee already on the table. At 58, he looked exactly as I remembered. Crew-cut silver-gray hair, weathered face, ramrod straight posture that screamed military even in civilian clothes. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a newspaper. "You look like hell," he said by way of greeting, folding the paper as I slid into the booth. "Feel worse," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the coffee mug. The warmth felt incredible. "Thanks for meeting me," he nodded, studying my face. "When's the last time you ate something?" I couldn't remember. Hank signaled the waitress and ordered 2 breakfast specials without asking what I wanted. Then he leaned forward. "Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." For the next 20 minutes, I talked while he listened, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. I told him about Carla's behavior changes, the martini night, the lab report, the divorce papers, being locked out, the frozen accounts. As I spoke, I pulled out the shredded lab report fragments I'd collected from the trash after Carla had torn it up. Hank spread the pieces on the table between us, arranging them like a puzzle. Our food arrived, and I suddenly realized how hungry I was. Between bites of eggs and toast, I watched him reconstruct most of the report. 35 milligrams of zolpidem, he murmured, tapping the paper. "That's a hefty dose. Enough to knock you out cold, maybe even dangerous. She tried to drug me, Hank. Why?" He sat back, removing his glasses. "2 possibilities. Either she wanted you incapacitated for some reason that night, or she's building a case. If you'd consumed that drink, you might have behaved erratically. Maybe she'd have called someone to witness it, or taken you to the ER, where they'd have found the drug in your system." The implication hit me. She's framing me. "That's what it looks like." He sipped his coffee. "But why? What's the endgame?" "Control of the company," I said immediately. "Fathom Tech is worth 8 figures now. We're privately held, and I own 51%. She wants my share." Hank nodded slowly. "That tracks, but she can't just claim you're unfit without evidence. She needs a pattern." The divorce filing mentioned chronic substance abuse, I remembered. Like it's been going on for a while. "Which means she might have tried this before," Hank said. "Maybe successfully." The thought made my stomach turn. How many nights had I felt unusually tired? How many mornings had I woken groggy and disoriented? Hank pulled a napkin toward him and started sketching what looked like a timeline. "First things first," he said. "We need proof she purchased the drugs. Without that, it's your word against hers, and she's already filed first, which gives her an advantage. How do we get that proof? Prescription drugs leave a paper trail. Zolpidem is controlled. You need a prescription. Either she got one from a doctor, or she bought it illegally." He drew a small square on the napkin. "Lakeshore Pharmacy near your house. They have security cameras, right?" I nodded, feeling a surge of hope for the first time. "They do. I've seen them at the counter. Most places keep footage for 30 days. If she filled a prescription there, we can request the video through legal channels." He checked his watch. "It's nearly 9. What do you say we pay them a visit? Now. No time like the present." He pulled out his wallet and dropped a 20 on the table. "My truck's out back. Let's go see what the pharmacist has to say." The drive to Lakeshore Pharmacy took 15 minutes. Hank filled the time asking detailed questions about Fathom Tech's structure, our marriage, and whether I'd noticed anyone unusual around Carla lately. His methodical approach reminded me why he'd been such a respected JAG officer. "Hank," I said as we pulled into the pharmacy parking lot, "I can't thank you enough for this." He cut the engine and gave me a sideways look. "Save it until we actually find something. This is just step 1. The automatic doors of Lakeshore Pharmacy hissed open. We stepped into the fluorescent-lit interior. the antiseptic smell hitting me immediately. Hank strode confidently toward the pharmacy counter at the back, and I followed, unaware that someone was watching our every move. The pharmacy was busy for a weekday afternoon. A line of customers waited at the prescription counter, each clutching their little white papers like lottery tickets. Hank surveyed the scene, then leaned close. "Follow my lead," he whispered, "and keep your eyes open for an opportunity." He approached the counter with the confident stride of a man who expected doors to open for him. I hung back slightly, scanning the layout. Behind the pharmacy counter, I could see 3 terminals, a door to what looked like an office, and security cameras mounted in the corners. One pointed directly at the pickup window. Hank cleared his throat and addressed the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with rectangular glasses. "Good afternoon. I'm Hank Rivers, attorney at law." He placed a business card on the counter. "I need to speak with you regarding a potential medication error investigation." The pharmacist's eyebrows shot up. "I'm not sure I can—" "This is a preliminary inquiry only," Hank continued smoothly. "No formal complaints have been filed. We're simply gathering information pursuant to Minnesota Statute 151.2140 regarding prescription error protocols." I had to admire his technique. He wasn't lying, not exactly, but he was creating enough legal fog to make the pharmacist nervous. "I should call the manager," she said. "That would be appropriate." Hank nodded. "In the meantime, perhaps you could show me your incident reporting forms. I'll need to verify they comply with current regulations." As Hank engaged her in increasingly technical conversation, I noticed the office door was ajar. Through the gap, I could see a desk with a computer. The pharmacist had stepped away from the counter to retrieve some forms, and the other technicians were busy with customers. This was my chance. I slipped behind the counter, moving with purpose as if I belonged there. Anyone watching would assume I was staff heading to the bathroom or supply room. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Inside the office, I quietly closed the door most of the way, leaving it cracked to hear if anyone approached. The computer was on, showing a screensaver of tropical fish. I jiggled the mouse, and thankfully, it wasn't locked. A pharmacy management system filled the screen. Years of Navy training kicked in. Assess, decide, act. I clicked on the security icon in the corner of the screen. A video management system opened, showing a grid of camera feeds. I plugged in the encrypted flash drive I'd brought, then navigated to the archived footage. My hands were sweating as I typed in the date range, the last 30 days. The system loaded a calendar view, and I started with 3 days before the drugged martini incident. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, watching the pickup counter. The timestamps rolled by. 9:15 a.m., 10:42 a.m., 1:37 p.m. Then I saw her, Carla, in her black Lululemon workout gear, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She approached the counter at 3:18 p.m., handed over a prescription, then waited. 8 minutes later, she returned to sign for something. The pharmacist said something, and Carla nodded, smiling that practiced smile I knew so well. I checked the date, exactly 2 days before she'd tried to drug me. With trembling fingers, I selected the clip, copied it to the flash drive, and then went back further. Had there been other incidents? I found 2 more clips of Carla picking up prescriptions in the past month. I copied those too, then opened the pharmacy system again. If I could find her prescription records. The door creaked. I snapped the laptop shut and spun around, heart in my throat. A young clerk stood there, surprise on his face. "Can I help you?" "Just looking for the restroom," I said, standing up. "Wrong door. Sorry about that." He frowned. "The public restrooms are in the front of the store." "Right, my mistake." I walked past him, praying he wouldn't check the computer or notice the flash drive I'd palmed. I made my way back to the counter where Hank was still deep in conversation with the pharmacist, who now looked thoroughly confused by his barrage of legal terminology. "And that's why proper documentation is essential for avoiding liability under the statute," Hank was saying. He spotted me and smoothly wrapped up. "Well, I appreciate your time. I think we have what we need for now." The pharmacist looked relieved. "So there's no actual complaint?" "Not at this time," Hank assured her. Just routine compliance verification." We walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine. I didn't speak until we were halfway across the parking lot. "I got it," I whispered. 3 visits in the last month. She picked up Zolpidem 2 days before she tried to drug me. Hank's face broke into a grin. That's what I'm talking about. Evidence, hard and clear. There's more, I said. She made 2 other pickups. I'm betting she's been drugging me for weeks, building her case. Did you get her signing for it? Crystal clear footage, date and time stamped. Perfect. Hank clapped me on the shoulder. This is exactly what we needed. Now we've got proof she obtained the drugs that showed up in your drink. I clutched the flash drive in my palm, squeezing it so hard my knuckles turned white. This tiny piece of plastic contained the first real evidence that could save my company, my reputation, my life's work. That's when I noticed it. An unmarked gray sedan idling across the street, its engine running. The windows were tinted, but I could just make out a figure watching us through the windshield. I felt eyes on my back the entire drive from the pharmacy. The gray sedan had pulled out behind us, keeping 3 cars between us, but I'd spent enough time in tactical situations to recognize a tail. Hank, I think we've got company, I said, checking the rearview mirror for the 5th time. Hank didn't turn around. Smart man. Gray sedan? Noticed it when we left. Been with us since the pharmacy. You think it's Carla's lawyer? Or someone she hired? Could be. Or it could be nothing. Hank's weathered face remained calm. Either way, we need to secure that footage. 1 copy isn't enough. I nodded, fingers still wrapped around the flash drive. I'll head to the office tonight. Make backups, store them in different locations. Good. And email me a copy, encrypted. Hank tapped his fingers on the dashboard. Don't tell me the password over the phone. We'll use the one from that fishing trip. The sedan eventually peeled off when I dropped Hank at his place. I spent the rest of the day driving aimlessly, checking constantly for tails, and waiting for nightfall. The weight of the flash drive in my pocket felt like the only solid thing in my life. Around 10 that night, I pulled into Fathom Tech's parking lot. The building stood dark against the night sky, just a few security lights glowing. I'd built this place from nothing, the curved glass facade designed to echo the waves of the lake visible from the upper floors. Now I was sneaking in like a thief. I used my keycard at the side entrance, half expecting it to be deactivated. The light flashed green. At least they hadn't locked me out of my own building yet. The hallway was dark and quiet as I made my way to the elevator. I hit the button for the 3rd floor, where the main design lab and server room were located. The soft hum of the elevator rising was oddly comforting, a normal sound in a life that had become anything but normal. When the doors opened, something felt wrong immediately. The motion sensor lights were already on. I froze, listening. Nothing but the hum of the HVAC system. Maybe the cleaning crew had forgotten to turn them off, but they never cleaned this late. I moved cautiously down the hallway toward the lab, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The glass door to the design lab was closed, but light spilled out from underneath it. When I pushed it open, my stomach dropped. Destruction everywhere. Workstations overturned, monitors smashed. The custom-built server racks that housed our proprietary designs had been gutted, hard drives missing, papers scattered across the floor like confetti after a parade. The acrid smell of fried electronics hung in the air, making my nose wrinkle. Jesus, I whispered, stepping carefully into the chaos. This wasn't a random break-in. This was targeted. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for. I moved to my office at the back of the lab. The door hung from one hinge, and inside was worse. My desk had been upended, drawers pulled out and emptied. The wall safe stood open and empty, though it had only contained hard copies of our patents, which were now strewn across the floor. Then I saw it, in the middle of the floor. My blood ran cold. The encrypted flash drive, or what was left of it. Crushed, the plastic casing split open, circuit board exposed and broken, a clear boot print stamped on top of it. I knelt down, picking up the pieces. My evidence, the proof that could have saved everything, destroyed. No, I muttered, turning the broken pieces over in my hands as if I could somehow fix it. In the distance, I heard it. Sirens, growing louder. Someone had called the police. Maybe the same someone who demolished my office and destroyed my evidence. Were they setting me up? Making it look like I'd broken in and trashed my own company? The sirens grew louder. Panic rose in my chest. tight and suffocating. I had to get out. Now. I backed toward the door, my mind racing. If I was caught here, in the middle of this destruction, with the freeze order in place and Carla's accusations hanging over me, how would it look? I'd be arrested on the spot. The sirens were close now. Very close. I slipped out of my office and headed for the stairwell at the end of the hall. As I reached for the handle, I heard the elevator ding. Someone was coming up. I ducked into the stairwell, heart hammering against my ribs. Through the small window in the door, I could see down the hallway to the design lab. The elevator doors opened, but no one emerged. The sirens were right outside the building now. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just a week ago, I had a wife, a company, a home. Now I was hiding in a stairwell, running from the police, with nothing but the clothes on my back. Through the frosted glass door of the design lab, I could see them, the strobing red and blue lights of police cars. They painted the white walls with alternating crimson and cobalt, a pulsing rhythm that matched my racing heart. I spent the night in my truck again, parked behind a 24-hour diner where I nursed coffee until my hands shook. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of shattered glass and flashing lights. By dawn, my neck was stiff, my mouth tasted like old pennies, and my thoughts were a tangled mess. I called Hank just after 6. They destroyed everything, I told him, voice rough from lack of sleep. The footage, the lab, all of it. Hank was quiet for a moment. Come over, now. His house sat on a quiet street in Edina, one of those mid-century ramblers with perfect hedges and a bird bath out front. The kind of place that whispered, retired professional, without shouting it. I'd been there a few times over the years, usually for advice on patent filings or contract language. When I pulled up, he was already waiting at the door in flannel pants and a navy sweatshirt, coffee mug in hand. The man was pushing 60, but still had that military bearing. Spine straight, eyes alert. "You look like hell," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Feel worse," I admitted. He led me down to his basement study, a wood-paneled room lined with law books and naval memorabilia. A large desk dominated the space, covered with stacks of paper and an ancient desktop computer that hummed like a small engine. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a leather armchair. "When exactly did you notice the security footage was gone?" I rubbed my eyes. "Last night, around 10. I went back to make copies, and the place had been ransacked. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for." Hank nodded slowly, then turned to a file cabinet behind his desk. He pulled out a manila folder and set it in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he said. "After we left the pharmacy yesterday, I had a hunch we might need backup. While you were downloading the security footage, I made friends with the billing clerk. Told her I was investigating insurance fraud. She let me copy the last month of purchase order logs." My heart skipped. "You're kidding. Navy taught me to always have a contingency plan." He tapped the folder. "It's not video proof, but it's something." I flipped open the folder. Inside were photocopied pages of purchase orders, prescription logs, and billing records from Lakeshore Pharmacy. Hank had already gone through them with a highlighter, marking dates and names. "Start with page 4, he said. I turned to it. The page showed a billing record from 3 weeks ago. My eyes scanned down the columns of data, dates, prescription numbers, billing codes. Then I saw it, highlighted in yellow. RX pickup, Brad Kessler. Next to it, the medication code for Zolpidem. The room seemed to tilt. I stared at the name, reading it over and over, willing it to change. Brad Kessler, my childhood best friend, the guy who'd helped me launch Fathom Tech from my garage, my 49% partner. We'd known each other since we were 10, catching frogs at the lake behind his parents' cabin. We'd built model rockets together, double-dated to prom, been each other's best men. When I'd come back from the Navy with ideas but no capital, Brad had liquidated his trust fund to help me start the company. "This can't be right," I said, but the words felt hollow even as they left my mouth. Memories started clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Brad's increasing pressure to sell to Meridian Defense over the past year. His sudden interest in my marriage troubles. The way he'd been so understanding when Carla started acting distant. Oh God, I whispered. The realization hit me like a depth charge. He's been working with her. Hank watched me carefully. When's the last time you saw them together? I thought back. Company dinner, 2 months ago. They sat across from each other, barely spoke. I paused, at least, not that I noticed. And before that, I don't know. Maybe at our holiday party. Brad's always been friendly with Carla, but they never seemed particularly close. Hank leaned forward. What about when you weren't around? The question hung in the air. I'd never considered it before. How many times had I been traveling for work, meeting with clients or suppliers? How many opportunities had they had? He wants my company, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. Meridian's been after our sonar tech for years. Brad's been pushing to sell, but I have controlling interest. Unless you were deemed unfit to run the company, Hank added, or if your assets were divided in a divorce. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd felt before. Carla's deception was one thing. Marriages could fail, people could change. But Brad, we'd built Fathom Tech together. His name was right there beside mine on the incorporation papers. I trusted him with everything, I said, my voice barely audible. This goes beyond your marriage, J.R., Hank said, tapping his finger twice on Brad's name. This goes deeper than marriage. The weight of Brad's betrayal pressed on my chest like an anchor. I slumped back in Hank's leather chair, my mind racing to recalculate everything I thought I knew. There has to be more, I said. One pharmacy receipt isn't enough to prove conspiracy. Hank nodded. I'm way ahead of you. He reached for his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. While you were sleeping on my couch last night, I called in a favor with an old Navy buddy who works for the phone company now. You did what? Nothing illegal, he assured me, turning the screen so I could see it. Just expedited the records you'd have gotten eventually through discovery. These are Carla's cell records for the past 3 months. I leaned forward, scanning the columns of numbers and timestamps. Most were familiar. Her sister, her yoga instructor, a few girlfriends. Then I spotted a number that appeared over and over, highlighted in yellow. That's Brad's cell, I confirmed, my throat tightening. Hank scrolled down, revealing dozens of calls, most lasting between 25 and 35 minutes. The pattern was unmistakable. Calls almost every night between 9 and 10 p.m., precisely when I'd be working late at the office or in my home workshop. Jesus, I whispered. How long has this been going on? The pattern starts about 4 months ago, Hank said. Sporadic at first, then regular by week 3. 4 months, while I'd been pulling all-nighters to finish our new submersible sensor array, the innovation that had finally put us on Defense Corps' radar, my wife and best friend had been plotting behind my back. There's more, Hank said, his voice gentler now. He hesitated, then pulled a manila envelope from his desk drawer. I wasn't sure if I should show you this, but you need to see everything we're dealing with. My hand trembled slightly as I took the envelope. Inside was a stack of glossy 8x10 photographs. The first showed Brad and Carla sitting across from each other at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Nothing damning there, just 2 people having lunch. The second photo caught them walking into the lobby of the Marquette Hotel downtown. Still nothing conclusive. The third photo knocked the wind out of me. They stood in a shadowy corner of what looked like a parking garage. Brad had Carla pressed against a concrete pillar, his hands on her waist, their lips locked together. Her fingers were tangled in his hair. When? Was all I could manage. Last week, Tuesday afternoon. The day I'd flown to Chicago to meet with a potential client. I'd called Carla from the airport, and she'd told me she was having lunch with her sister. I flipped to the next photo. They were getting into Brad's Audi, his hand on the small of her back. My investigator friend took these, Hank explained. I asked him to follow Brad after we found his name on that prescription receipt. Didn't take him long to find this. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile them with the Brad I thought I knew. The guy who'd stood beside me at my wedding. who'd helped me build prototype circuits on my kitchen table, who'd celebrated with me when we landed our first government contract. It all makes sense now, I said, the terrible clarity washing over me. Brad's been pushing to sell to Defense Corps for months, said we'd peaked as an independent outfit. And you disagreed? Damn right I did. Our new sensor tech is revolutionary. Military applications, sure, but also environmental monitoring, search and rescue. If we sold now, Defense Corps would bury half the potential and weaponize the rest. I closed my eyes, remembering Brad's increasing frustration during board meetings, his thinly veiled comments about my stubborn idealism, the way he'd started bringing up my erratic work hours to other investors. He couldn't force a sale because I hold 51%, I said, the pieces clicking together. But if I were deemed mentally unstable or if my assets were split in a divorce, he'd suddenly have controlling interest, Hank finished. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I rushed to Hank's bathroom and barely made it before emptying my stomach. The taste of bile burned my throat as I gripped the cold porcelain. When I returned, pale and shaking, Hank handed me a glass of water without comment. "We used to fish Maple Lake every summer," I said after a moment, my voice hollow. "His dad taught us both how to cast. Brad couldn't tie a proper knot until we were 14. A memory surfaced, Brad and me, 16 years old, laughing as we tried to paddle a capsized canoe back to shore. The recollection, once warm, now felt poisoned. "We built the company prototype in my garage," I continued. 3 straight days without sleep. When we finally got it working, he hugged me so hard he cracked my rib. I set down the glass, my hand unsteady. And now he's trying to drug me out of my own company. Hank watched me with a soldier's patience, letting me process. "I've been fighting the wrong battle," I said, the realization dawning. "I've been focused on Carla, on saving my marriage, when that was just... what? A distraction. A side effect. A means to an end," Hank corrected. "Carla was the weapon. The target was always your company." I closed my eyes, whispering. "Then I've been at war with the wrong enemy." Hank nodded gravely, then reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out another manila folder, this one thicker than the others, and slid it across the desk. On its tab, written in Hank's precise handwriting, were 2 words, Kessler Strategy. I spent the next 2 days in a roadside motel that charged by the week, room 114. The kind of place where the ice machine always seems to be broken, and the neon vacancy sign flickers just enough to give you a headache if you stare at it too long. My phone buzzed every few hours. Brad, Carla, even a couple board members. I let them all go to voicemail. What was there to say? "Hey, thanks for drugging me and trying to steal my company." The words would just turn to ash in my mouth. The first night, I ordered a pizza. Took 2 bites and couldn't stomach any more. It sat in its box until morning, when I finally tossed it in the trash. The smell had started to turn, just like everything else in my life. You ever notice how shame has a physical weight to it? It sits on your chest like a cinder block. Makes it hard to breathe, hard to move. I'd built Fathom Tech from nothing, wired the first prototype with my own hands. Stayed up 3 days straight debugging code that defense contractors said couldn't work. Now I was hiding in a motel room with paper-thin walls, listening to the couple next door argue about whose turn it was to walk the dog. Funny how fast it all falls apart. I flipped through late-night TV until my eyes burned. Infomercials mostly. Some guy selling knives that could cut through a shoe, then slice a tomato paper thin. I watched the whole thing twice. Then some miracle cream that erased wrinkles, a blender that could pulverize a cell phone. Around 3 in the morning, I started to wonder if any of those miracle products could fix a broken life. By dawn, I was drafting an email to Brad. Simple, direct, I'll take the buyout offer. 4 words that would end everything I'd built. 4 words that admitted defeat. My finger hovered over the send button. Just 1 click and it would all be over. I didn't press it. Not because I was brave, just because I finally fell asleep. The next morning, well, afternoon really, someone pounded on my door hard enough to rattle the chain lock. I stumbled out of bed, half expecting to see another process server. Instead, Hank Rivers stood there holding 2 large black coffees and a brown paper bag that smelled like something actually worth eating. "You look like hell," he said, pushing past me into the room. "Good to see you too." He set the coffee on the nightstand and tossed the bag at me. Inside was a breakfast sandwich still warm enough to fog the wrapper. "Eat," he ordered. "I'm not having a strategy session with a man running on fumes." I unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. It was the first real food I'd had in days, and my body seemed to remember it was hungry. "I almost gave up last night," I admitted between bites. "Almost emailed Brad to take his buyout offer." Hank's expression darkened. "And give that backstabbing son of a bitch exactly what he wants." "What's the alternative? Fight a battle I've already lost." Hank set down his coffee cup with enough force to splash liquid over the rim. "Lost? You haven't even started fighting yet. They took everything, Hank. My home, my accounts, my credibility. They took your stuff," he corrected. "Not your fight." I shook my head. "You don't understand. Even if I win in court, which is a big if, the company will be damaged. Investors spooked, contracts in jeopardy." Hank leaned forward, his weathered face inches from mine. "Let me tell you something my drill instructor told me 40 years ago. The man who stops 1 inch short leaves the mile to his enemy." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me. You run 99% of a race, then quit before the finish line. You might as well have stayed home." He jabbed a finger at my chest. "This isn't about your marriage anymore. It's not even about your company. It's about whether you're going to let them take your self-respect too." The words hit like a physical blow. Something hot and angry flared in my chest, the first real emotion besides shame I'd felt in days. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than before. "I've got no money, no evidence, and a court date in 3 weeks." "You've got more than you think." Hank tapped his temple. "You've got that brain that built military-grade tech in a garage, and you've got me." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it, expecting another call from Carla or one of the board members. Instead, a text message flashed across the screen. "Need to talk. Private meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. Fathom conference room. Just you and me. One last chance to resolve this amicably. Brad." I showed Hank the message. He read it twice, then looked up at me with narrowed eyes. "He's nervous," Hank said. "Wants to take your temperature, see if you're ready to roll over. Or maybe he's got one more trap to spring. That conference room could bury you or save you," Hank said, his voice gravelly with warning. "You need to decide which." I'd never been inside Defense Corps' downtown headquarters before. The place was all sleek glass and polished steel. Exactly the kind of corporate showroom that made my skin crawl. 40 stories of ambition wrapped in reflective windows that looked down on Minneapolis like it owned the place. Which, I suppose, it nearly did. The receptionist led me to an elevator that required a keycard swipe. "Mr. Kessler is expecting you on 38 Mai," she said with a practiced smile. The elevator rose with barely a whisper. No creaking cables or mechanical groans like the freight lift at our workshop. Just smooth, efficient movement that matched the company's whole vibe. Powerful, silent, unstoppable. I straightened my tie as the doors opened. It was Hank's tie, actually. Navy blue with subtle diagonal stripes. "Look the part," he'd said that morning while nodding it for me. "Even when you're bleeding inside." Brad's assistant, a razor-thin woman with immaculate hair, led me through a maze of cubicles to a corner conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city and the lakes beyond. I could just make out the shoreline where my house stood. My house, not Carla's. Not yet. Brad rose when I entered, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with one practiced flick. "JR," he said, extending his hand. "Thanks for coming." I shook it briefly, remembering how that same hand had passed me beers on fishing trips, clapped my shoulder at my wedding, signed partnership papers in my garage workshop. The betrayal felt physical, like a splinter working deeper under my skin. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair across the polished conference table. "Coffee?" "No." He poured himself a cup from a silver carafe, stirring in cream with deliberate slowness. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally arrived, pattering against the windows in an irregular rhythm. "I'll get right to it," Brad said, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm prepared to offer you a clean exit. No court battles, no messy public spectacle." I opened the folder. Inside was a buyout agreement, the purchase price circled in red ink. The number had so few zeros I almost laughed. "This is a joke, right?" Brad's expression didn't change. "It's fair market value, considering the circumstances." "Circumstances you engineered." He sipped his coffee. "Allegations aside, this is the reality we're in. The board is concerned about leadership stability. Your personal situation has created—" He paused, searching for the right corporate euphemism. "Confidence issues." "You mean the lies about me being unstable? The ones you fed to my wife before you slept with her?" A flicker of something, not quite guilt, maybe annoyance, crossed his face. "That's not productive, J.R. Neither is drugging your business partner." The rain picked up, drumming harder against the glass. Brad leaned back, one manicured hand adjusting his cufflink. "The offer expires at midnight," he said. "After that, we proceed to court. Defense Corps' legal team will back our position. You'll lose the company, the house, everything, and spend years paying legal fees you can't afford." He slid an expensive pen across the table. It rolled to a stop against my hand. "Or you can walk away with something. Not what you hoped for, but something. A fresh start." I picked up the pen, feeling its weight. Outside, the city blurred behind sheets of rain. How easy it would be to sign, to surrender, to stop fighting. Hank's voice echoed in my head. "The man who stops 1 inch short leaves the mile to his enemy." I set the pen down and closed the folder. "Thanks for the generous insult, Brad, but I'll pass." His confidence faltered for just a second. "You're making a mistake." "Not the first one. Won't be the last." I stood up, straightening Hank's borrowed tie. "But I want a full partner meeting tomorrow at Fathom Tech. All board members present." "For what purpose?" "To make my case directly. Before this goes to court, everyone should hear both sides." Brad's laugh was short and dismissive. "You think the board will choose you over Defense Corps' offer? They've seen the medical reports. J.R. They've heard about the erratic behavior. Then one more meeting won't change anything, will it?" He studied me, trying to spot the angle. I kept my face neutral, channeling every poker game we'd ever played in my boathouse. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine, tomorrow at 10, but it won't change the outcome." "We'll see." I left without shaking his hand. The assistant escorted me back to the elevator, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. Outside, the rain had turned the sidewalks dark. Hank waited in his weathered Jeep across the street, wipers slapping back and forth. I slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from my jacket. "Well?" he asked. He offered pennies on the dollar, valid until midnight. "And?" I told him to shove it, demanded a full board meeting at Fathom tomorrow. Hank's eyebrows rose. "Bold move," he agreed. "He thinks it's just delaying the inevitable." "Is it?" I turned to face him, my decision solidifying with each word. "Wire every inch of that room, Hank. Every square inch." A slow smile spread across Hank's face. He reached behind the seat and patted a weathered duffel bag I hadn't noticed before. Inside, I caught a glimpse of recording equipment, microphones, and what looked like several small cameras. "Already packed," he said, nodding toward the bag, "just waiting for the green light." Dawn hadn't even broken when Hank and I slipped through Fathom Tech's service entrance. The building felt different in darkness, more like a tomb than the vibrant workshop I'd built. My security code still worked. I'd programmed the system myself, and no one had thought to lock me out of that yet. Small victories. "How much time do we need?" I whispered, flipping on the minimal emergency lights in the hallway. Hank checked his watch. "At least 90 minutes for a proper job. More would be better." "We've got until 10. That's..." I did the mental math. 4 hours. "Perfect," Hank said, patting the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Let's get to work." The boardroom stood at the end of the hall, my pride and joy when we'd moved into this building 3 years ago. I designed it myself. A wall of windows overlooking the lake, custom walnut table I'd finished by hand, leather chairs that still carried the rich smell of tannery. Now it felt like enemy territory. "Start with the light fixtures," Hank instructed, unzipping the bag on the conference table. "I'll handle the molding." I nodded, grabbing a stepladder while Hank laid out an array of devices that looked straight out of a spy movie. Tiny microphones no bigger than shirt buttons, wireless transmitters, a tablet with monitoring software. "Navy teach you this?" I asked, climbing the ladder beneath the central light fixture. Hank's laugh was soft and dry. "JAG officers pick up interesting skills, especially ones who handled espionage cases." He handed me a microphone and transmitter pair. "Tuck it into the recess where the fixture meets the ceiling. Make sure the mic faces down toward the table." My fingers trembled slightly as I positioned the device. The stakes felt suddenly, overwhelmingly real. If we failed here, I'd lose everything. Not just my company and home, but my reputation. My legacy. "You're overthinking it," Hank said, reading my hesitation. "Just like installing sonar equipment. Focus on the task, not the consequences." He was right. I took a breath and secured the device, making sure it blended perfectly with the fixture's black housing. For the next 2 hours, we worked in methodical silence. Hank placed microphones behind the crown molding at strategic intervals around the room. I installed cameras disguised as thermostat sensors near the air vents. Every device connected wirelessly to the tablet Hank had set up in the adjacent supply closet. "Check audio," Hank said, standing beneath one of the vents. I tapped the tablet screen, cycling through the microphone feeds. "Testing 1, 2, 3, he said in a normal speaking voice. His words came through with crystal clarity. I gave him a thumbs up. "Now cameras." I switched to the video feed. 4 different angles of the room appeared on the screen, each capturing the table and chairs from different perspectives. No blind spots. "Perfect," I said. "We'll catch everything." Hank nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. Now for the hard part, hiding the receiving equipment. We selected the supply closet adjacent to the boardroom, rarely used and perfect for our needs. Hank set up the tablet on a shelf behind boxes of printer paper, angling it so we could monitor everything from a crack in the door. "We'll need to be absolutely silent once they arrive," he warned. "These walls aren't soundproof." The coiled cords and wires scattered across the floor reminded me of snakes ready to strike. I carefully bundled them, tucking everything out of sight. The AC vents hissed softly overhead, a constant white noise that would help mask any sounds we might make. "Time check," Hank whispered. I glanced at my watch. 8:30 a.m. 90 minutes until the meeting. "Let's run a final test." We returned to the boardroom. I sat at the head of the table, my usual spot before all this began, while Hank paced around, speaking at different volumes from various positions. We needed to ensure every word would be captured, no matter where anyone sat or stood. Back in the closet, I reviewed the recordings. Crystal clear, no dead zones. "We're good," I confirmed, relief washing through me. "Now we wait." Hank checked his watch again. "I'll make one last sweep for anything we might have missed." I nodded, eyes fixed on the tablet screen. Through the boardroom windows, I could see the sky lightening over the lake. Another day, perhaps my last as the owner of Fathom Tech. The building's security system pinged on the tablet. Someone had entered the main doors. I quickly switched to the lobby camera feed. "Hank," I hissed, "they're early." He hurried back to the closet, peering over my shoulder at the screen. Brad's sleek BMW was visible in the parking lot. And beside it, stepping out of the passenger side, was Carla. My pulse spiked, a hammer against my ribs. Even on the grainy security feed, I could recognize her walk, the tilt of her head as she said something to Brad. 30 minutes early, Hank muttered. Bastards trying to catch us unprepared. We hadn't finished our final equipment checks, hadn't confirmed the recording function was properly saving to the secure cloud server. "Back door," I whispered, pointing to the service exit behind the supply room. "We can..." The elevator bell dinged in the hallway. Too late. "Hide," Hank mouthed, sliding into the closet beside me. I pulled the door nearly shut, leaving just enough space to see the tablet screen and a sliver of the hallway. The elevator doors slid open with a soft mechanical purr. I barely dared to breathe as Brad and Carla entered the boardroom. They moved with the easy confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Brad tossed his leather portfolio onto the table while Carla trailed her fingers along the back of my chair, at the head of the table. "Might as well get comfortable," Brad said, loosening his tie slightly. "We've got some time before the others arrive." Carla perched on the edge of the table. "Are you sure JR will show? After your little chat yesterday, he seemed broken." I felt Hank's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. On the tablet screen, I watched Brad laugh, a sound I once associated with camping trips and late-night strategy sessions, now twisted into something ugly. "He'll be here," Brad said. JR has always been predictable. Honor and duty above all. He mimicked my voice with the last words, and Carla giggled. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Beside me, Hank checked his watch and nodded. Time to move. He slipped out of the closet first, briefcase in hand, while I counted to 30. Then I followed, squaring my shoulders and stepping into the hallway. The conference room door was still open. Just saying we should have the papers ready when... Brad stopped mid-sentence as I appeared in the doorway. His face shifted instantly from smug to professional. JR, right on time. Carla had the decency to look uncomfortable, at least. She'd moved away from my chair, arms crossed defensively. "I brought a notary," I said, gesturing to Hank, who entered behind me. "For transparency." Brad's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't believe we've met." "Henry Rivers," Hank said, extending his hand. "Retired JAG officer. I sometimes assist in corporate matters." His tone was perfectly bland. Just another bureaucratic functionary. "I wasn't aware we needed additional legal representation," Brad said, but shook Hank's hand anyway. "Just covering bases," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Shall we begin? The others won't be here for another 20 minutes. Carla shifted her weight, glancing toward the door. "Perhaps we should wait." "Actually," Brad interrupted, "this gives us a chance to talk privately." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Have you reconsidered my offer, JR? Midnight's coming fast." I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that used to come during storm drills at sea, when chaos swirled but your training took over. "I've been thinking about your generous proposal," I said carefully, "but I'm curious about something first." "What's that?" Brad asked, a hint of wariness creeping into his voice. "How long have you been planning this? The takeover, I mean." I kept my tone conversational, even as I watched Hank position himself near the door, ostensibly arranging papers from his briefcase. Brad's smile widened. "Business is business. JR. Nothing personal." "It feels personal when your wife drugs you," I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Then Brad laughed. A real laugh this time, unrestrained. "You should see your face right now," he said. "So righteous, so wounded. That's always been your problem, JR. You think business should be fair." Carla stepped closer to Brad, a united front. "We didn't want it to happen this way," she said, though her eyes held no regret. "No," I raised an eyebrow. "How exactly did you want it to happen?" Brad leaned back in his chair, suddenly relaxed. Pride was always his weakness, the need to be acknowledged as the smartest person in the room. "The original plan was simpler," he admitted. "Convince you to sell to Defense Corps, split the profits, everyone walks away happy. But you're so damn stubborn about keeping the company independent. So you decided drugging me was the answer." I kept my voice level, eyes flicking briefly to the air vent where I knew camera 3 was recording every word. "That was a stroke of genius, actually," Brad said, tapping his fingers on the table. "Carla's idea, originally. Just enough zolpidem to make you seem unstable. Document the behavior. File for divorce citing emotional instability and substance abuse." Carla smiled, clearly pleased with herself. "The court freezes everything during proceedings. With your accounts locked and reputation in question, Defense Corps lowers their offer. And you both cash out," I finished. "Everyone wins. Brad said with a shrug. Defense Corps gets the tech they want. I get my payday. Carla gets her freedom and a nice stock portfolio. And what do I get? I asked. Brad spread his hands. More than you deserve, honestly. Enough to start over somewhere else. Maybe something smaller, more your speed. On the tablet screen hidden in Hank's briefcase, I could see all 4 camera feeds working perfectly. Every damning word was being recorded and streamed to our secure server. Hank cleared his throat. If I might ask a procedural question, the transfer of ownership requires board approval, correct? Technically, Brad said with a dismissive wave, but the board follows the majority shareholders once JR signs over his shares to me. Suddenly, a small red warning light began flashing on Hank's tablet. Wi-Fi dropout. The connection was failing. My heart lurched. No, not now. Not when we were so close. Hank caught my eye, a flicker of alarm crossing his face before he smoothed it into professional concern. Excuse me, he said, gathering his papers. I need to make a quick call to verify some paperwork details. Won't be a moment. He slipped out of the room before Brad could object. I needed to keep them talking, keep the confession flowing. So let me get this straight, I said, leaning forward. You drugged me, framed me, and stole my company, all for money. Brad's smile turned cold. Don't be naive, J.R. It was never really your company. You had the technical skills, sure, but I brought the connections, the investors. You were always just the guy in the garage with a soldering iron? Carla laughed, the sound like glass breaking. He still thinks he built something special. It's adorable, really. I watched the tablet screen in my peripheral vision. The connection icon was flashing red, then yellow, then red again. Hank must be racing to the server closet. And what happens after? I asked, desperate to keep them talking. Once that fool signs, the audio cut out. The video feed froze. Silence. My pulse hammered in my ears. Everything we'd worked for hung by a thread. Once that fool signs what, Brad? I prompted, fighting to keep my voice steady. Brad's eyes narrowed, suddenly suspicious of my calm. He glanced at the empty doorway where Hank had disappeared. Where did your lawyer friend go? He asked. Just checking some paperwork, I said, tapping my pen on the table. You were saying, once I sign... Carla touched Brad's arm. Maybe we should wait until the notary returns. I needed to keep them talking. The red light on the hidden tablet kept blinking. Come on, Hank. You know what I don't understand? I said, leaning back in my chair with forced casualness. Why go through all this trouble? The drugging, the divorce filing. Why not just make me a straightforward offer? Brad snorted. We did, multiple times. But you and your vision for the company. He made air quotes with his fingers. Always talking about independence and innovation while sitting on tech the defense sector would pay millions for. So, you decided to take it, I said flatly. We decided to liberate it, Carla corrected, her smile tight. From someone who clearly doesn't understand its value. I thought of the lake house I'd built with my own hands, the company I'd grown from nothing, the marriage I'd believed in. All of it slipping away because I'd trusted the wrong people. And what happens to me after the hearing tomorrow? I asked. Brad exchanged a glance with Carla, something unspoken passing between them. You'll have enough to start over, he said, but his eyes didn't match his words. Somewhere else. In the hallway, I caught a flicker of movement. Hank was sprinting back from the server room, his face flushed. On the tablet screen, I saw the connection icon pulse yellow, then green. Whatever Hank had done, it was working. The stream was back online. Enough to start over, I repeated. That's generous of you, considering you're taking everything I've built. Brad leaned forward, his mask of civility slipping. Let's be clear about something, JR. You're getting anything at all because I'm allowing it. The courts already think you're unstable. One more incident. He snapped his fingers. And you could lose even that. Are you threatening me? I asked, voice perfectly calm as I watched the green light steady on the tablet. Stating facts, Brad said. Defense Corps doesn't like loose ends. Neither do I. Carla laughed, the sound cold and unfamiliar. Don't be dramatic, Brad. He's not a loose end. He's just irrelevant now. I felt sick hearing her talk about me like I was nothing. This woman who'd shared my bed, my dreams, my life. And after the hearing, I pushed. What happens then? Brad's smile turned predatory. Then we close the deal with Defense Corps. They get the patents, we get the payout. And you? He paused, enjoying the moment. You get to watch from the sidelines as everything you built makes us rich. The door opened and Hank stepped back in, looking slightly winded but composed. He caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. We were live again. The board was watching. Sorry about that, Hank said, settling back into his chair. Had to verify some details with the clerk's office. Brad waved a dismissive hand. No matter. J.R. Jas was just about to sign our settlement agreement, weren't you? I picked up the pen, turning it slowly between my fingers. Just one more question, if you don't mind. After I sign this and the hearing concludes tomorrow, what exactly happens to me? Brad sighed impatiently. We've been over this. Humor me, I said, one last time. Something in my tone must have triggered Brad's suspicion. He studied my face, then glanced at Hank, who was arranging papers with careful attention. Fine, Brad said finally. You want it spelled out? You get a pittance settlement, a ruined reputation, and a strong suggestion to relocate far from Minnesota. Defense Corps doesn't want you developing competing tech or talking to journalists. And if I don't cooperate? I asked quietly. The corner of Brad's mouth twitched upward. There are ways to ensure compliance. J.R. Legal ways. Mostly. Carla placed her hand over Brad's. Don't, she warned. But Brad was on a roll now, confidence surging through him. He leaned across the table, voice dropping to a near whisper. Between the psychiatric evaluation we've arranged and the evidence of substance abuse, he'll be lucky if he's allowed to design toasters after we're done. He'll never see daylight after tomorrow. Hank cleared his throat, sliding a paper toward Brad. Would you mind initialing here, Mr. Kessler? Standard acknowledgement that you've reviewed the terms. As Brad reached for the pen, Hank turned his tablet around. On the screen were 8 shocked faces, the entire Fathom Tech board of directors, watching in real time. Brad froze, pen hovering above the paper, as understanding dawned in his eyes. 1 hour later, I sat in County Courtroom 306, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. The room smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. The high ceiling made every whisper echo, and the dark wood paneling reminded me of ship's quarters, confined but formal. Judge Eleanor Price studied the emergency evidence packet Hank had assembled, while I tried to read her expression. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she hadn't looked up for nearly 5 minutes. Across the aisle, Carla sat with her attorney, a sharp-featured man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Brad wasn't present. Last I'd seen him, he was being escorted from Fathom Tech by security while shouting about entrapment. You ever stand before a judge when your whole life's hanging in the balance? I whispered to Hank beside me. Back in the Navy, even captain's mass didn't feel this final. Hank squeezed my shoulder. Eleanor Price doesn't suffer fools. That works in our favor today. The judge finally looked up, removing her reading glasses. The courtroom fell silent. I've reviewed the evidence submitted by counsel for Mr. Murphy, she said, her voice surprisingly soft but carrying authority that filled the room, including the recorded admission of conspiracy between Mrs. Murphy and Mr. Kessler, pharmacy security footage, and toxicology reports. She shuffled papers, creating a sound like autumn leaves. I remembered raking the yard at our lake house last fall. Carla bringing me hot cider, both of us laughing about something trivial. The memory stung worse than any physical blow. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and malicious manipulation of court proceedings, Judge Price continued. The emergency freeze on Mr. Murphy's assets is hereby vacated, effective immediately. My attorney straightened beside me. Carla's lawyer was already on his feet. Your Honor, we request a recess to review this new evidence and prepare a response. My client, Judge Price raised her hand, cutting him off. Request denied, counsel. I'm not finished. The lawyer sank back into his seat. Carla's face had gone pale. Furthermore, the judge continued, based on the documentary evidence and recorded admissions, I am issuing a preliminary ruling that John Robert Murphy shall retain full ownership of Fathom Technologies, including all patents, intellectual property, and physical assets previously held jointly with Bradley Kessler. The air rushed from my lungs. I felt Hank's hand grip my shoulder, steadying me. Your Honor, Carla's attorney tried again. This ruling is premature without counsel, Judge Price said, her voice taking on an edge. I've reviewed Mr. Kessler's explicit statements regarding his intent to manipulate these proceedings and defraud both this court and your client's husband. Do you wish to associate yourself with that conduct? The lawyer hesitated. No, Your Honor. I thought not. She turned to the clerk. Please prepare reinstatement orders for Mr. Murphy's access to all corporate and personal accounts, effective immediately, and schedule a full hearing on punitive damages for next month. She struck her gavel once. The sound reverberated through my chest like sonar. Court is adjourned. Mr. Murphy, please remain for processing of your reinstatement paperwork. As people began to rise, I caught Carla's eye across the aisle. For a moment, I saw something there. Not remorse exactly, but the dawning realization of what she'd thrown away. Then her lawyer whispered something, and she looked away. We did it, Hank murmured beside me. Told you Eleanor doesn't tolerate games in her courtroom. I nodded, still processing. It doesn't feel real yet. It will, he said, especially when you see what's waiting outside. The bailiff approached with a thick manila envelope. Mr. Murphy, these are your reinstatement orders. Judge Price expedited them. You'll need to sign here and here. My signature felt strange, like I was writing with someone else's hand. Each stroke of the pen restored something I'd thought was gone forever. Congratulations, sir, the bailiff said, handing me my copy. Doors that way when you're ready. I glanced toward where he nodded and saw through the small window in the courtroom door. The hallway beyond was filled with people holding cameras and microphones. What's going on? I asked Hank. Word travels fast, he said with a small smile. The board members who watched Brad's confession, they called an emergency investor meeting. They're waiting for a statement from the rightful owner of Fathom Tech. I looked down at the papers in my hand. My company, my life's work, returned to me by a single stroke of a judge's pen. I don't know what to say to them, I admitted. Hank straightened my tie. Just tell them the truth. That's what won today. The bailiff held the door open. Camera flashes popped like lightning through a storm cloud. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the reinstatement orders in my hand, and stepped forward to reclaim what was mine. I stood at the back of the conference room, watching the emergency shareholder call on the massive screen. My reflection ghosted in the polished mahogany table where I'd sat countless times before. The familiarity felt strange after days of motel rooms and Hank's basement. The motion to remove Bradley Kessler from all positions within Fathom Technologies is now on the floor, announced Marjorie Wilkins, our 70-year-old board chair. Her voice carried the same no-nonsense tone that had intimidated me when I first pitched her for seed funding 12 years ago. Directors will now cast their votes. One by one, they responded. The first aye came from Wilkins herself, followed by 8 more in succession. No abstentions. No dissent. The vote stands at 9 in favor, 0 opposed. Bradley Kessler is hereby removed from all positions within Fathom Technologies, effective immediately. Hank nudged my arm. That's a clean sweep. I nodded, throat tight. The enormity of the day was finally hitting me. Doesn't bring back the time I wasted trusting him. No, Hank agreed, but it does bring back your company. On screen, Wilkins continued. We have received formal notification that Defense Corps has withdrawn their acquisition offer, citing, and I quote, unforeseen complications in the management structure. A few chuckles rippled through the digital assembly. Their legal team has also disavowed any knowledge of Mr. Kessler's activities. Convenient, I muttered. Corporate cowardice at its finest, Hank agreed. Nobody wants to be associated with a sinking ship. My phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. I pulled it out to find a stream of notifications, mostly news alerts and social media tags. I opened one to find the recording of Brad and Carla had been leaked online. The footage had gone viral. with Fathom fraud and Raw Gold Digger sting trending. Did you? I looked at Hank. He shook his head. Not me. But 9 board members had access to that feed. Only takes one with a nephew who knows Reddit. I scrolled through some of the comments. People had already created memes comparing Carla to what someone called a discount noir femme fatale. One particularly viral post juxtaposed her social media, charity gala, photos, with screenshots of her laughing about drugging me. This is brutal, I said, feeling an unexpected pang of, not quite sympathy, but something complicated. That's the court of public opinion, Hank said. No rules of evidence, no right to counsel, just judgment. My phone rang, a Minneapolis Star-Tribune reporter. I declined the call. You'll need to make a statement eventually, Hank said. I know, just not today. We left the conference room and walked to the elevator. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see a cluster of news vans in the parking lot. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of the lobby television. The news crawl at the bottom read, Kessler ousted, Murphy reinstated as Fathom Tech CEO. Surreal, I said as we descended. Truth has that quality sometimes, Hank replied, especially when it arrives after a stretch of lies. The elevator stopped at the mezzanine level. I need a minute, I told Hank, stepping out. Meet you downstairs. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I walked down the familiar hallway, past the design lab where I'd spent countless late nights. My badge still worked. Judge Price's orders had been thorough. I unlocked my office door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it the day Carla had drugged my drink. Yet it felt like walking into a museum exhibit of someone else's life. I ran my fingers along the edge of my desk, feeling the slight imperfection where I'd accidentally gouged it while unpacking the first shipment of our flagship sonar units. My phone buzzed again. A news alert showed reporters crowded outside Carla's downtown condo. The camera caught her hurrying from a car to the building entrance, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. Ignoring shouted questions, I set the phone down and opened my desk drawer. Inside was a small velvet-lined box I'd ordered weeks ago, before everything fell apart. I'd planned to surprise Carla with it at our anniversary dinner. A polished brass nameplate for the Lake House dock, Murphy Point, EST 2012. Instead, I lifted out a different box, one Hank had brought from the engraver this morning. I opened it slowly, the hinges creaking slightly. Inside, nestled in midnight blue velvet, lay a gleaming brass nameplate. The fresh engraving caught the light. Fathom Tech, EST, by J. R. Murphy. I ran my thumb across the raised letters, feeling each ridge and valley. This wasn't just a sign. It was a declaration of ownership, of survival, of truth finally having its day. I pulled into the Fathom Tech parking lot just as the horizon started bleeding orange into the charcoal sky. 5:30 in the morning, and the world felt brand new. I sat in my truck for a minute, just watching that sunrise gather strength, painting the glass facade of my building with amber light. The brass nameplate sat on the passenger seat, still in its velvet box. I ran my thumb over the engraving one more time before slipping it into my jacket pocket. The weight of it against my chest felt right. My phone buzzed with a text from Hank. Pulling in now. Brought coffee and hardware. I smiled. That man never missed a detail. Hank's pickup rolled up beside mine, and he climbed out with 2 steaming travel mugs and a small tool bag. His weathered face crinkled into a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Morning of truth, he said, handing me a mug. The coffee smelled like hazelnut and possibility. Thanks for coming, I said. Didn't have to be this early. Wouldn't miss it. Some moments deserve witnesses. We walked toward the building together, our breath fogging in the cool Minnesota morning. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the lobby, my lobby, welcomed us with the familiar scent of polished wood and fresh air. Any regrets? Hank asked as we rode the elevator. I thought about it. About exposing them? No. About trusting them in the first place? I sighed. That's complicated. Trust isn't the mistake, Hank said. Trusting blindly is. There's a difference. The elevator doors opened to the main floor. We walked down the corridor to the executive entrance, the oak double doors that served as Fathom Tech's formal gateway. I'd selected that wood myself, years ago, running my hands over samples until I found one with the right grain, the right feel. "You hear about Brad?" Hank asked, setting down his tool bag. "The SEC investigation?" "Yeah. 3 separate violations they're looking at, plus the corporate espionage angle." Hank shook his head. "He'll be lucky to avoid jail time." I took a sip of coffee. "And Carla. Social media's a bloodbath. All those sponsorship deals she lined up, fitness apps, boutique brands, that lake life influencer nonsense, they're dropping her faster than a hot rock." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction, just a hollow confirmation. Financial ruin and public scorn. Fitting, I guess. "Justice comes in many forms," Hank said, opening his tool bag. "Sometimes the court of public opinion is more effective than the legal system." He handed me a cordless drill and 2 brass screws that matched the nameplate. I pulled the plate from my pocket and held it up to the door frame, right above eye level. "Here?" I asked. "Perfect." I pressed the drill bit against the oak and squeezed the trigger. The wood accepted the first screw with only token resistance. I lined up the second hole and repeated the process. The whir of the drill seemed to echo through the empty building. "Company car pulling up," Hank said, glancing out the window. "Looks like Channel 5. I raised an eyebrow. "How'd they know?" "Might have tipped them off," Hank admitted with a half smile. "Thought this moment deserved some documentation." I shook my head, but couldn't help smiling. "Always 3 steps ahead, aren't you?" "Old habits." I slid the nameplate onto the screws and tightened them with a few turns of the screwdriver. The brass caught the morning light streaming through the windows, sending a golden reflection dancing across my hands and the wall opposite. Fathom Tech. Est. By J. R. Murphy. Simple, direct, true. Outside, I could see a small cluster of reporters gathering. The Channel 5 crew was setting up a camera. Word traveled fast in this town. "You ready for them?" Hank asked. "I think so." I stepped back to admire the nameplate. "What do you think?" "I think it looks like it belongs there," he said. Always did. The cedar-scented lake wind swept through the open door, carrying the promise of a new day. I could almost taste the freedom in that breeze, the release that comes from reclaiming what's yours. A reporter called my name from outside. Time to face the cameras, to put words to what had happened. But first, I needed one more moment with this symbol of everything I'd fought to protect. I ran my finger along the edge of the brass plate, feeling its solidity, its permanence. "Truth is a man's final fortress," I said quietly. Hank squeezed my shoulder. "Damn right it is." I squared my shoulders and turned toward the door, ready to step into the light.